So let's get the second session started this morning. Then we're going to go for the lunch. Okay, our next speaker is Dr. Alejo Lifschitz. I did it correctly last time, but Lifschitz. Right? You correct me now. He's gonna. Yeah, we're very excited to have two scientists from Meta today. Three scientists, two will give a talk. And first talk will be given by Alejo. He's going to talk about needs for materials breakthrough in the field of AR and high RI nanoparticles. Leo. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Jiwon. Okay, so my name is Alejo Lifschitz, and I lead display materials research in our research team at Meta Reality Labs. And I'm very excited to be back here for a second time to talk about the need for material innovation in our field. Now, last time I was here, I tried to give a very generalized vision of the role of materials research in our field, how there's many different opportunities that institutions like this one and the partners that are being represented today can take on to have a meaningful impact on sort of like their long-term trajectory of the field. But today, being the second time that I come here, I wanted to be a little bit more particular about a specific topic that I think would resonate very well with this community, and that is the need for high refractive index, very high transparency nanoparticles. Okay, all right. So the perspective that I'm giving here comes from the point of view of our product roadmap, which at this point in time, 2025, is the biggest heavyweight in the field, setting the trajectory of AR devices certainly, but arguably also for wearable AI devices. These include things that have already been commercialized, such as our Ray-Ban Meta smart glasses, AI glasses that have been tremendously commercially successful, as well as things that will soon come along through our pipeline, such as display-containing glasses, and of course, the North Star of our field, which is a fully immersive AR for general-purpose computing at a glass. This is something that was captured by a production-scale demo, Orion, about 6 months ago, but which is still a few generations away in terms of technology, since there's still a very large need for materials and nanofabrication breakthroughs in order to take this from production demo to full commercialized technology. So when I talk about the need for innovation, this goes really well beyond trying to figure out how we miniaturize these modules that make up the IPs, how do we stitch them together, how we integrate them. Actually, the need for innovation goes much deeper than that. If we look even within each individual module, we find that presently, in 2025, there's no consensus in the field of AR of what these modules should be built out of, what the architecture should be. Instead, what we have is a collection of very different types of ideas in the field that are competing with each other. Each one comes with different types of advantages and disadvantages. And instead, what we have, even at the module level, is a very complex trade space for what the technology choice should be. Each choice and architecture offers different optical performance, weight, form factor, cost, scalability, and maturity type of situations. And it is the role of material and nanofabrication breakthroughs to resolve this kind of like somewhat chaotic type of competition between different technologies to eventually get to the North Star of our field, full immersive AR. So let's take the waveguide module in particular, which arguably is one of the most complex modules in this whole eyepiece. Right now we have maybe 4 different type of well-established scalable architectures that we can choose from, and they're competing with one another. We have things like surface relief gratings or polarization volume holograms or geometric waveguides that they all offer a fair bit of maturity. They've all been scaled industrially to different degrees, but each one of them introduces different types of optical artifacts, and the fabrication speed in some cases is pretty low, so that has significant impact on cost. We have, on the other end of the spectrum, things like volume Bragg gratings that, because of the physics of how the gratings in these waveguides work, offer, theoretically, a very low amount of optical artifacts, and the fabrication speed can, in principle, be very high. But of course, the maturity here for the materials and processes hasn't been proven at scale yet. So it is the role of material and fabrication breakthroughs to try to resolve the competition by uplifting these different type of architectures. And I think that over the next few years, we'll be seeing quite a bit of that. So that instead of having to shift towards maybe unknown or unproven type of architectures, we can take well-established things that we know how to bring up to industrial scale and then address some of their drawbacks. And one of the material breakthroughs that I think our field will go through in the next few years that I wanted to highlight here are high refractive index transparent nanoparticles. Now, transparent nanoparticles are a general formulation component that we use for many different layers within every single one of these architectures. And if we're able to provide better materials in our field, then we'll be able to, for example, apply them for moldable nanocomposites for SRGs, liquid crystal, hybrids, high refractive index holographic media, and high refractive index adhesives. Let me take you through a little bit of the history of nanoparticles in our field and maybe give you my perspective of where I think the next few years will be about where we will be going. So nanoparticles, like I mentioned, are a general formulation component that we use for many different resins that make up different parts of the stack, either in R&D efforts, and some of them have already been applied industrially. The advantage of using this formulation component is that we can mix the high processability and low cost of organic resins. These are the matrices that contain the nanoparticles. And then we embed them with high refractive index inorganic crystals. And then we bring them together. We can sort of like uplift the refractive index, which is the key optical property that we're looking for in many of these layers. So in the industry, we've already seen examples of using these nanocomposites to make lenses, adhesives, encapsulation, planarization layers, overcoats, maybe make the grading themselves out of nanocomposites, and maybe one day we'll be looking at substrates that themselves are made out of nanoparticles. So we have a lot of cost benefits and optical benefits that could come from having better nanoparticle components in our field, but of course, there's also a lot of risk. Right, nanoparticles can be very high reactivity. They can agglomerate, create haze, yellow over time. And they bring along a lot of reliability challenges. So our field has been trying to adapt to all of those disadvantages. We started really paying attention to this maybe 8 or 9 years ago, right, when the field of AR started growing a lot. And our approach or our strategy back then was just to simply look at the dispersion of all available materials, comparing refractive index versus band gap, and try to find the highest refractive index material in the transparency window. So obviously that's titanium dioxide. There's a lot of commercial sources already, and so we started sourcing them, us and many others. And very quickly, we applied them to make very complex, high-quality nanostructures. In this case, what I'm showing here is a nano-imprint lithography of some SRG gratings containing titanium nanoparticles. But we also found the limitations very quickly too, right? And this is something very common in the field of AR. What we call a transparent material is very different from what most other people call a transparent material. We're asking for extreme transparency and extreme stability of the transparency over time. So titanium dioxide is also a very good photocatalyst, very good at degrading things around them, very good at turning things yellow. And even a trickle of this reactivity over time essentially completely degrades device performance, right? So what we found with a lot of these early efforts is that the refractive index goes down over time, goes back to maybe what an organic resin refractive index might be, and the absorption and yellowing, scattering go up as well. So the state of the field back then turned out to be having this issue as a sort of like a general type of behavior, right? So if I take here, for example, a sample of commercial and R&D sources in the market a few years ago, we see that if we photo-age them or thermally age them, these are nanoparticles from many different suppliers, many different types of chemistries, all of them lead to yellowing and scattering way beyond what is needed for a stable and efficient AR device. So clearly the yellowing behavior and the degradation behavior was very pervasive across the market, and the process was poorly understood. It was not clear how to overcome this issue because, of course, if you look at the literature, everyone's trying to publish, their best photocatalyst. No one's trying to make the worst photocatalyst in the world, right? So we didn't really know exactly how to fully solve this issue. So it's problems like this that my group at Meta focuses on, try to find mechanistic understanding for sort of like generalized overarching issues in the industry, and work with our vendors and development partners to try to offer industrially compatible solutions. So from our efforts came what I would call the first wave of AR nanoparticle research. We first started dealing with a lot of the stoichiometric reactivity of nanoparticles. A lot of these reactions, from the yellow and the gray, the matrices, they require direct tethering and interaction with the surface of the nanoparticle. So obviously what we needed there was the right kind of shell and protective coating around the nanoparticles. And so what we looked at was different type of shell chemistries. We want to look for a shell that is as high refractive index as possible. That's pretty easy. And also we want to find shells that have the right electronic structure. We want to find something that fully hugs the band gap of the titania core so that it doesn't act as a cascade for charge transfer, maybe makes it an even more active photocatalyst. So from that work, it's pretty clear that we need to work with our vendors to make higher quality zirconia shells around our nanoparticles, make them as compact and as thin as possible so that we don't lose too much refractive index. The long-range reactivity of these materials, on the other hand, was a little bit harder to understand. So we always had a trickle of photoreactivity, and the real breakthrough here came from understanding that the surface of these nanoparticles, the oxide surface, is a very complex chemistry, has lots of different species and defect types, and each defect has a very different type of excited state lifetime. So that lifetime is the window of opportunity that we have to collect the charge on the surface and then transfer it to the environment. So what we did here is just identify which surface states were the culprit for most of the photoreactivity, and then we devised chemical treatments to specifically target those surface species and make a much more photostable nanoparticle. So the result of that, about a couple of years ago, was that we demonstrated on an R&D scale this passivation approach for the highest nanoparticles, highest refractive index nanoparticles that we have in the market. We make the most stable nanoparticles in the market at R&D scale and then transferred it to our development partners, and that material has been now commercialized last year. I think as far as I know, we use this material for some efforts, but many other people in the industry are now using it as well. So this is a nice example of sort of like the first iteration that our field has gone through in order to upgrade materials. Now, the second wave of AR nanoparticle tech is something that's currently unfolding. So we have many different R&D efforts across the industry to try to make more stable and high refractive index materials. The approach that the field as a whole is taking is not very different from what we've done already, okay? So we're also looking at transparent bulk materials, and what we're doing here, instead of focusing on titania, is just choosing materials that maybe have a lower refractive index, but because they're not photoreactive, they're more stable, then we don't need to build so many layers and passivation species around them, so the refractive index turns out to be maybe slightly higher, and what we're trying to buy here is a little bit of improvement on reliability. So I think we will be seeing this in the market from many different type of sources soon. But the next wave of AR nanoparticle research, I think, will take us quite a bit further in terms of refractive index. So this will be a major shift in strategy for how we tune nanoparticles. What we will be doing here is to try to focus on materials that are inherently much higher refractive index. Of course, those materials are not transparent in the bulk, but what we will be doing is trying to think of ways in which we can tune that transparency by changing their structure at the nanoscale. So we will be grabbing different materials from this space and trying to change their nanostructure. So of course, there's a lot of things in the literature that sort of at least revolve around this concept. If we look at materials and sort them out by direct band gap only, or if we look at 2D materials, maybe really thin 2D materials, we start seeing things that start popping up from this dispersion curve. So there's a lot of sort of like breadcrumbs in the literature for us to follow, and I think over the next few years we'll be seeing some of these materials coming from this area and then starting to populate some nanoparticle sources in this area of transparency. And then finally, of course, we want to operate with materials that we can use as transparent components regardless of their nanostructure. And so what we want ultimately is a material that, regardless of whether it's a nanoparticle or not, has a band gap that is large enough to be transparent, and the refractive index is much higher than the best materials that we have right now. That material doesn't exist. No one knows what that would be. But what we have the opportunity to do that now with AI and machine learning assisted material discoveries to really accelerate and answer the question whether the material exists or not. So at Meta and many other places, those efforts have already started, and I think this will become the fourth and maybe final wave of AR nanoparticle research. Many people are starting to mine all the existing data sets that we have for inorganic crystals. We're also bringing in AI-generated data sets, and we're combining them with high-throughput approximations. We can compute at very, very large scales and then take the best candidates and pass them through low-throughput but very high-precision modeling. And so far, this has started to yield many different leads. So here is a little bit of how that dispersion curve changes with these new ultra-high Ri candidates that in principle, as far as computational chemistry can tell us, are the best materials that we can ultimately make for nanoparticles for AR. Okay. All right, so with that, I hope I painted a pretty clear picture about how our field is in this very highly dynamic state, where architectures and technologies are still actively being negotiated, even down to the module level, and maybe offered a clear opportunity for institutions like this one and maybe the partners that also attend this conference to get involved with materials research. So thank you.
Is there any haziness or light scattering data that and then you are targeting or this kind of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So we want to have no scattering at all, right? We want these nanocomposites to behave more or less as continuous resins, right? So if we keep the nanoparticles small enough, then in principle they shouldn't be able to interact with light and scatter and generate haze. It's very easy to do that by design at the component level, but of course you need to prevent the nanoparticles from aggregating and then forming larger domains over time. And the quality of the formulation is related to that, making sure that everything is like well stabilized over time.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So my question is, I presume the high index is due to essentially mostly just off-resonant broadband light matter interaction. In atomic physics, right, you have this phenomena where if you're on resonance, you can have essentially slow light, very high refractive index. Is there anything in the literature where taking advantage of some kind of resonance could give you a much higher effective refractive index? Obviously, you have to deal with absorption, but
Yeah,
just from a fundamental physics point of view.
Yeah. So those dispersion curves that I show here, right? They're not mathematical relationships. This is really a great place for physicists, and this hasn't been fully answered from a physics perspective. What makes up an ultra-high Ri refractive index material? Those curves are just empirical observations, and there's been a lot of work trying to fit them to specific mathematical modules, trying to focus on individual material physics properties, but no one has generated a mathematical relationship. So as we find these ultra-high Ri materials, and then we make them experimentally, I think it would be a great breeding ground for physicists to then go back and understand, okay, what was the physical nature behind that? I have a few theories if you want to talk afterwards. Yeah, absolutely. So I highlighted many different opportunities. I would say that if we have this component, we'll use it for all sorts of things, right? So one of the dynamic structures that I mentioned here is like liquid crystal hybrids, right? I think our industry and our collaboration network is really good at taking these components and formulating them into really high quality type of applications. What's most needed right now is just the right core material.